Welcome to the Method Podcast. I'm Aidan Simpson, and this is where we talk to designers at Google about work, life, and the future of design.
I have an overarching goal for myself, my career, that has stayed pretty constant, but that's always helping me get new challenges, which is I want to help people do things that they didn't think they could do themselves.
That was Darren Delaye, a user experience designer working on virtual reality. Darren and I talked about the unique challenges of designing for VR systems, how Google's approach to design has changed over the last 12 years, and much, much more. So that's enough from me. Let's get into this episode with Darren Delaye.
My name is Darren Delaye, and I work on the Daydream VR team. And I've been at Google for just over 12 years.
12 years.
Yep.
I looked at your resume and it's 13 pages long.
And it probably hasn't been updated in 2 or 3 or 4 years.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you in the first place is you're a person who has touched nearly every major Google product out there. Everything from Google Docs, Google Ventures, Google Maps, and now this kind of new project, VR.
Yeah.
What's hard about VR?
VR is the biggest jump I've ever made in terms of how much of a change it is from my previous projects. In like 2008 or 9, I switched to mobile design from all the web design I'd done before that. But that was pretty straightforward because everybody was a mobile user and it was still flat design. But changing to a truly 3D medium is just the biggest shift in tools and techniques and perception. You can throw everything about mobile design out the window when you move into VR. Okay. Not everything about user interaction and the way that people need to understand your UI and move through it. But in terms of layout and what you have to do at a time and stuff like that.
So you mentioned some of the similarities. Can you kind of talk about the main differences and the main learnings that you found?
When you go into VR these days, there's sort of a sense of amazement and wonder. Like you have to wait a few seconds when you first show a VR UI for the user to look around and get their bearings and understand where they are and what they're seeing. Speed isn't necessarily the main thing that we have to worry about in terms of like task completion. And then because the UI is all around you, we have to make like decisions from a broader set of possibilities. Everybody's first instinct when they design for VR is to say, I have all this space. I can use it all. I can put up so many windows at once. I can show a million tiles of content at the same time. I can put things up, down, left, right, and behind you. But actually, that's overwhelming. And so we have to stay a little more cautious about where in a user's field of view that we decide to put all our stuff and what they're going to read first, what they're going to notice, how far away or close up to them things have to be. And then one of the biggest differences in VR right now is screen resolution. That we got pretty used to these great screens that we have on our phones, that once you hit that retina level, that everything else is gravy. And even on the very first smartphones, you'd use the same number of pixels as a desktop monitor. And fonts were as big as your eye needed them to be. You could make out those pixels, make out those letters and those pixels. But when you take today's super high resolution phones, but stretch with the optical lenses that same number of pixels over your entire field of view, it turns out we're way below retina resolution in terms of what you can see. And you have to make the text much bigger in terms of the physical size, the perceived how much of your field of view one letter takes up in order to make that drawn with enough pixels for it to be readable. So we have giant text these days and just to make things readable in VR.
A user still needs a consistent place to go to find the actions that they need.
Yeah.
Are you coming up with new paradigms?
Yeah.
To where to put stuff?
We are. We also have a controller. So one of the biggest differences with Daydream compared to, say, Cardboard is the controller we're using. It's also a big difference compared to the other mobile VR that's out there, like your VR. We have buttons like your TV remote does, or like your game console controller does, that can be your safety blanket to get you back to home and stuff like that. We've started to look at stuff like the grid being centered directly in front of you, as opposed to even thinking about it like you read from the top left down, that the center of your field of view is where we need to think about our UIs starting. So when we put a back button or a close button, a lot of times we put it centered down at the bottom, but centered so that that feels like a primary spot, not somewhere floating in an arbitrary spot like somewhere in the upper left.
What do you guys see as the opportunities for VR?
VR has the opportunity to transport you somewhere else and put you in another environment. It's unique in the fact that even though VR is not the end of the line for all the technology that we're building, there is a direct line through VR to AR, which has the potential to, replace your phone and replace every screen we see on a day-to-day basis all the time in the long run. But VR is still not going to go away because VR's experience is something kind of momentous or a big paradigm shift, which is that you're not where you are, you're elsewhere. You feel like you're dreaming, which is where the name came from, that you get to experience something amazing you never would have gotten to otherwise. And for a while, I think that VR experiences are just amazing in the sense that when you go to a theme park, you go to Disneyland, you go to Universal Studios, they show you some amazing experiences. Well, VR can do a lot of those types of amazing experiences that you get to try, you get to say you did them, but in the comfort of your own home or a friend's home. So that's just sort of the entertainment side. We start out right now thinking about VR as having tons of entertainment potential and possibility. And then as our inputs get better and our controls get better, it starts to become more useful for getting some of the things done that you might want to do.
I can see like a huge application in education.
Absolutely. Our expeditions program was absolutely amazing. And it was really only possible because of the way that cardboard started, that you really could take 30 or 50 of them, put them in a box, and take them to a classroom. And the team that created expeditions was sort of struck gold in terms of what the bang for the buck that you could get from sending a tablet and 50 phones and cardboards to a school and getting to take kids on a virtual field trip. In terms of the education things that you can do in general, you can do things like training, like teach someone how to do something by showing them and having them do it. You can put people in an interactive virtual classroom. You can have the teacher making appropriate or constant eye contact with every student in the room, even if they're not actually making eye contact with that student, which has been shown to increase retention. There's actually lots of little tricks that will help you remember what you've learned that become possible when you move it into a context like VR.
You talked about some interesting kind of research findings there. What has surprised you the most whilst you've been developing Daydream, do you think, from a user research kind of standpoint?
I don't know about surprised, but one of the things that I've liked getting the most from our research team is all of the ergonomics that we need to know about in order to make this product happen, to think about the wide range of body positions and body measurements, ranges of motion. It's really different to design VR for a person who's sitting back in a chair, standing up, can take a few steps, or might be lying back on their bed. And similarly, all those positions mean different ranges of motion, not just for your neck, but for your arm and your hands that we have to account for. And one of the interesting things that we had to do in the kind of late in the design process was we have our controller, and it's a motion controller. You can point at things, works great. But since the screen's all around you, we had to choose where the UI should be on the screen, up and down, side to side. And we chose that mostly based on the range of motion of your neck and your eyes, where you can look. But being able to point at them was just as important. And we really started to realize that pointing far down is a really stretchy, uncomfortable motion for your wrist. The way you hold a TV remote and then try to point it at the ground kind of stretches your wrist in a bad way. And we realized that we needed to actually make the pointer, the laser pointer, come out at a bit of a downward angle from the controller in order to optimize the range of elbow and hand motion with where you're going to need to point at the UI in Daydream.
This might be a very simple question to answer, but how do you physically user test Daydream? Is it the same as any other product? Get them in a room?
It is pretty similar to any other product. We mostly used a couch, actually, as the best analog for the way that users will be in reasonably long VR sessions. So we'd sit our users on the couch, and we would have them actually take the device out of the box, like it was the very first time they would use it, put their phone in it, and go through all the setup steps, and then go through our controller tutorial, our sign-in, our form of payment entry, and then try an app. And they'd get through all those steps, and those actually sort of made up our critical user journey set that we were testing against for like the last bunch of months leading up to launch.
So you just want to get them up and running as quickly as possible, and what's the most effective way?
And making sure they understood the really critical parts, like how to use the controller.
We've all seen the internet memes of like people like running into walls in their houses and knocking stuff. Do you have any plans on how you might keep people safe?
Yes. So right now in Daydream, we don't track your movement. We only track the rotational position of the headset. And so there's actually less of an instinct for people to take steps or walk or run because their scene won't move. Their head in the virtual space won't move. And so most of the problems you have where people are doing dangerous movement or running into things is because those systems did let you take a couple steps, but if you take a couple more, you're going to hit your wall. And so in the first version, we do run through like recommendations, like sit or stand for this. As VR gets better, you do want to be able to track movement. And I think one of the first things we're going to do when we don't want people to move at all really is pretty much fade to black when you get too far away from where you start, which has a natural tendency to make you lean back to where you started. Then once you can move around the entire room, we've got more work to do to make sure you don't hit the walls.
It's also a slight departure. I can't help but think about Sergey and his original plan with Glass to get people to look up from their phones and to be immersed in the world around them. And Daydream and VR is going the opposite way. It's a very solo exercise.
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts of that. Is I do think of it as one of my main goals of my job is to make VR socially acceptable or a social activity. And there are great ways to do that. It's really fun to watch somebody who's in VR do fun things. Like people in a living room can all have fun with just one of them in a headset. That's absolutely true, especially if you can see what's going on in the headset. It's really magical, actually, to be able to be co-present with someone else as if you were in the same room together in VR. You feel like they're there because they're bobbing their head and moving their hand as if they're there. And if you can hear them, it's an experience that's more magical than the graphical fidelity would make you think it is. Okay, so VR together and social VR is going to be really powerful. Okay. There is another aspect to that, which about like keeping your head up and being present in the world you're in, which is interesting to me in VR, which is that we as the platform designers and the Daydream team kind of get to make this choice going forward about whether people still have all the interruptions of their life showing to them in VR, or whether we keep it a little more like your sanctuary from all the things around you. I think some people are going to want one and some people are going to want the other. So for example, if somebody sends you a text message, do you want to get that popping up inside your VR game? Some people say, no, I was watching something amazing. I don't want to be taken out of it. And other people say, yeah, that's important. If I miss out on getting that notification, then I'll just always be worried that I'm missing my notifications. Yeah. And so it's just interesting to me that we get to make the choice. And as an analogy, like on our TV products, we don't pop up your notifications on a TV. Yeah. But the reason for that is because you've got your phone with you and you can glance at it still. And when you're in VR, you can't. You are isolated from your phone. And people have different reactions to being isolated from their phones.
Talking about the phones themselves, it's an interesting choice technology-wise to opt for doing this on a mobile device. A lot of other players out there that I've read about, you need your high-end Windows PC to run VR, but we're making the choice to use mobile phones.
Actually, one of the reasons I got really interested in VR was the Gear VR, which was the first really good mobile VR solution, and that was when I saw that this would really be a thing, that it was good enough to make you feel like you're elsewhere. The mobile VR is really our strength, and I think in the long run, it's absolutely the right thing to do because it provides a better form factor for comfort and the types of headsets that you need to wear for being untethered from a giant computer. It should be less expensive. In the long run, it's a much better solution. We get comfortable VR. We don't get like high-end console video game graphics, but the immersiveness makes up for it in most cases. That things being all around you, video can stream just as well on a mobile device as it can from a desktop. That the technology is ready, and so we're kind of getting all of our technology and our stacks and our designs ready from the mobile side first, as opposed to having to wait for mobile to catch up to some nicer version. But that would have been heavier and tethered. So yeah, mobile first for us.
You talked about your responsibility to get people to be more social using VR.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any interesting applications you've seen within the company or outside that are pushing VR in that direction and helping you?
Yeah. One of the coolest things we did was we dedicated a team of prototypers to do use case validation for VR. So they could use any platform they wanted, and they had a couple of dedicated rooms to just creating the best things we could try in VR as a team. And for months, the best things everybody wanted to try were where you were hanging out with someone else in VR who was in a different headset. And you could make a jigsaw puzzle together. You could play a game. You could play dress up at one point. And that was kind of where we learned that it is this magical experience. And then I compare social VR to the types of video conferences that we have today. So the biggest downside is you can't look the other person in the eye. You've got a headset on and they probably have a headset on. But you can do things together. Like you can play a game, you can watch some media, you can watch a presentation, you can point at things and direct each other's attention, and you can feel like you're having a conversation. So it's great to have an activity to do when two of you are in VR together, but also I think that it can replace or augment that feeling that you get. Like the reason why a lot of people FaceTime or call their grandparents isn't so they can share information. It's not so they can talk, because you could talk on the phone. The reason you FaceTime is because you feel like you spent time together. Actually, that's the word I use, is you spent time. Yeah. I spent time with my grandfather. Yeah. And I think you can achieve that same thing in VR with activities where you're doing things in social VR, which is feeling like you spent time with that other person, getting to know each other, feeling like you shared an experience.
So you were kind of the design lead, and you were on the Maps project for the whole of the kind of the mobile birth of it. Right?
Yeah, I was the mobile design lead for Maps for like 4.5 years, and then the last year or two of that, all of consumer Maps.
Mm-hmm. Are there any parallels that you can draw between working on Maps and Daydream? The big canvas, the big surface, anything like that?
No, the Maps is such a utility. It's like indispensable. And I always thought about it that way. How do I get this task done for the user so they can put the phone back in their pocket? And Daydream, in the near term thinking about it, I think about it as an entertainment device. How do I keep people to form a habit to make this part of their entertainment choices for the things they're going to do? There is one part about it where I do draw some parallel, which is that I've always thought about local search on Maps as the place store. That just like if I'm shopping on the on the Play Store or looking on Netflix, that there's one element of maps that turns into an entertainment choices part, which is like, hey, where do I want to go to dinner, or where do I want to travel? And so we'd think about like, okay, well, I'm only going to choose one of these, but several of them might be interesting to me in the long run. What hooks me about it? What red flags do I see? I want to do my due diligence. And that carries over for me, that way of thinking, into the version of the Play Store that we have in VR, where you're making a lot of choices about like where to spend your money, where to spend your time. If it's free, what's the cost? Well, the cost is like having to download it still, because it's a big download, which is kind of similar to saying, oh, this restaurant is far away and I have to drive there, even though it's not an expensive restaurant. That's the cost to me. I have this one parallel in mind when I'm doing part of my Daydream job now.
What compelled you to become a designer in the first place?
I was a computer science major and I did an HCI master's at Stanford, and I got an internship here as a UX designer. I was the third design intern at Google. There were two others one the year before me and one the year before that.
Right.
And so there were about 12, 13 people on the design team at the time. And I started to love building interfaces as a programmer when I was in school. And I knew I didn't want to write backends. I wanted to make things that people could use.
How has the design org changed at Google in that time?
The shift is sort of just in emphasis and the institutionalization of how important it is to get the UX right, to get the design details right, because you could always do it with good personal relationships where you had proven out what you needed to with your research team, and you had been persuasive with your pitch to your product management and engineering, and you'd put together all the right materials, and you'd made it easy enough to implement because of the design choices you made and your understanding of the technology. We could get our products to be great and usable on the back of the designer's work. But now I think there's more people who are willing to step up and say that the design parts are important and that spending all the time that it takes is important. In the last few years, I think that our tools for flowing from the design departments to the engineering departments have made a world of difference in making it easier to do the right thing. I used to say the easiest thing always wins. That'll be the decision that your team goes with. And if the easy thing is also the thing that the design team prefers, then that's how we get our job done.
How have the design roles changed in that kind of tenure?
Yeah, we've started to specialize. I mean, I remember when that started. I used to say we do our own visual design, like we do our own stunts. And then we had one visual designer. That was Doug Bowman. And that was like the first person that was not a UX designer or a UX researcher. And from there, yeah, we've gotten to have so many people who have specialized, amazing skills. Prototyping was one of the skills that a lot of our designers already had. That was one that we always kind of recruited for in our designers. But yeah, the writers and the motion designers and all the people who have jobs that help us do one thing really well, those are so great to have.
What has kept you interested over the last 12 years?
I have an overarching goal for myself, my career, that has stayed pretty constant, but that's always helping me get new challenges, which is I want to help people do things that they didn't think they could do themselves. So it's really about empowerment. And there's always new things that I can help them do and new things that our technology can help them do. And so with that being my theme, it's like every product I have, I'm all about adding new capabilities. Hopefully it's not just new features, but the things that make a difference because they weren't things you could do before without asking your techie son or daughter to help you with. And that's been true for all my projects.
You talk about making the jump to managing there. That is something that's like, I feel like is a hot topic in our design org. There's a lot of designers who would like to make that jump. Kind of what's been the greatest personal challenge for you in becoming a manager over the years?
Well, it's probably hiring, actually. Making sure that I spend enough time doing the hiring parts and reaching out to people and finding people that are the right fit for a role and things like that. Personally, that's like the part that I am constantly challenging myself to keep at.
Is there anything else you would like to improve in 2017?
On the Daydream team, there's a new challenge that I've never had to face before, which is not knowing exactly what versions of your platform, your hardware, the future to design for. Normally, the easiest projects are the ones where you know the goals and you know the parameters. But when we designed the iOS version of Google Maps, we knew exactly what 4 features we needed to launch, and we had a ship date, and we had a backend that worked. Sometimes working on the Daydream team and in VR, we can't even know like what year's version of hardware and platform capabilities we should be thinking about when we look at the specificity of something like designing a VR keyboard. Like, oh, well, should we only design it for today's controller or a controller that might be out 2 years from now? The resolution of today's screens or the resolution of a screen that might be out a year or 2 or 3 from now? It just takes a lot of planning and then some discipline to not get lost thinking about too many things and try to focus.
You're a very energetic guy. What are you most excited about for the next 12 years?
Well, I'm pretty excited to see like what Google's able to do with the future of screens and the assistant. I would like for us to see if we can make our lives both more streamlined and peaceful and also more informed.
Darren, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, cheers. Alrighty, just a final word from us at Google Design. Did you know you can sign up for Google Design's quarterly newsletter covering the latest and greatest design stories from Google and beyond? All you have to do is go to design.google/newsletter, put in your details, and receive all this goodness straight into your inbox. One of my favorite parts is actually the 5 things to love right now section. This is a curated list of cool things chosen by people at Google, and I always learn something new. All right, that's it from us.